Hang on. Is like lead and gasoline actually better for your car? Like it makes
okay, objectively maybe. It keeps
but it's so much worse for humanity.
Yeah.
Giant Leap with Taylor Wilson.
So Taylor, we got a question from a listener about lead. You know, we know that lead is bad for us. At least a lot of us are told, you know, hey, lead is bad for us.
Hopefully we know that.
Yeah, people should know that. But why? Why is it bad for us? Like it's toxic.
Yeah.
Why? What does it do to us?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's the PhD level explanation and there's the kindergarten explanation, and maybe
Let's start with kindergarten.
Maybe I can do a little bit of both.
Okay.
I mean, I think the important thing to know is that lead is a almost universal poison in the body. It attacks many of the different body systems, but in particular, the one we probably worry about the most is the neurotoxicity. This goes for a lot of heavy metals. Mercury is similar, but lead is not good in the body, and why is not as simple as saying it's one thing. You know, there's some poisons that have one mechanism of action. The toxicity is because of one thing they do. Think radiation, like damaging the genome.
Okay.
The effects of lead in the human body are really hard to pin down the exact causes because lead does a bunch of different things. I would say one thing that is really important about lead is that it kind of mimics some of the important metals in our body. Two of those metals in particular, zinc and calcium. The lead can kind of be an imposter, right?
So our body thinks it's one of these, like something that we should use, you know, like
sure.
we need to take in calcium and zinc.
Exactly. And we build things like enzymes that rely on these metals. And when there's lead there, it kind of sends everything haywire. So a good example of that would be there are certain enzymes in the body that are very important for the function of our brain, our tissues, our regulatory systems, our communication systems in the body. And when you have lead interacting with those enzymes, they no longer function properly. And so the systems that those enzymes support no longer function properly. There's a good example of people using heavy metals as face creams to demelanize their face and make their face very white. And it's because the enzyme, one of the enzymes that is vital to the production of melanin, when you get the heavy metal in there, it no longer works right. And so that's just an example of how these heavy metals can kind of dysregulate the functioning of the human body.
Okay. So there's a lot of things. And the one thing that I know that lead does is like it makes people angry.
It makes people angry potentially. Okay. It makes people
more
have
violent, I guess.
Lower IQ. You know, that it actually drops the intelligence quotient on testing of people exposed to even small amounts. So the toxicology of lead and other heavy metals, again, is really a bunch of different things, right? It mimics other metals in the body. It can cause a lot of reactive oxygen stress. So think free radical production.
I don't know. Okay, free radical. What's free radical?
Well,
production?
you know, you can say take your antioxidants, eat your fruits and vegetables, get the antioxidants. The antioxidants scavenge these free radicals, which can damage cells.
Those are just like things that you consume.
So free radicals are reactive chemical species that are formed in the body. They're formed by natural aging. They're formed by exposure to the sun and ionizing radiation. And they're formed by heavy metals. And it is that action of reactive oxygen stress, reactive oxygen species, and oxidative stress from these heavy metals that actually is a lot of the damage that things like lead and mercury can do to the body. They cause a lot of inflammation. So there's a pro-inflammatory response from these heavy metals. And in the case of lead and mercury, they can pass through the blood-brain barrier. And the blood-brain barrier is very important. And in fact, they damage the blood-brain barrier. It's a very important part of kind of like the evolution of our central nervous system to really protect our brain, our cognition, our core processing power from all of the scary things that we encounter, bacteria and you know, foreign proteins and toxic things we might eat. But the lead and the mercury, they get right in. And once they're in the brain, whether it is, you know, disrupting some very important enzymatic pathway, whether it's creating these oxidative stress and reactive oxygen species, whether it's promoting inflammation, the devastating effects on the brain of heavy metals shouldn't be discounted. And that's why to your point, what you said, we see things like increased rates of violence and, behavioral problems in kids and in populations of kids that are exposed to lead. And we see a marked decrease in IQ points and IQ testing in populations that are exposed to lead. And it doesn't have to be large amounts of lead. I mean, we're not talking like they're sitting there and they're eating the lead paint off the wall.
Yeah.
These are...
And it stays in your body, right?
Yes. Unfortunately...
You can't really get rid of it?
Unfortunately, a lot of these heavy metals, including lead, bioaccumulate. And it's actually scarier for children because in adults, a lot of lead bioaccumulates in the bones. And bones, in adults, it's kind of a safe space for the lead. But in children, because...
I've always said that. Yeah. Keep your lead in your bones, kids.
Yeah, oh yeah. But in kids, because they're growing, the bone is remineralizing a lot. It's basically constantly getting reformed, broken down and reformed. Well, but any of that lead that might have gone into the bones is kind of constantly being re-exposed into their bodily systems, and it gives it the opportunity for it to end up in their brain and cause damage. So lead is horrible, right? But what is our kind of like history of lead?
We put in our gasoline, right?
We put in our gasoline,
and in paint,
among other things. It's funny if you look through the history of materials.
It seems like it's a relatively useful material.
Yeah, like a lot of things, like asbestos, lead. The history really is. I mean, there's a set of heavy metals: mercury, arsenic, chromium, and lead. Hold on. Mercury. There's a set of heavy metals.
Mercury, arsenic, chromium, lead.
Mercury,
helium,
lead,
oxygen,
chromium, arsenic. These were elements that in antiquity and early human history were very accessible. You could find lead, you could find mercury, you could find arsenic, it's too many elements. You could find arsenic.
I've been saying it for years. I think we should cut down the periodic table, less elements.
Just fission them all.
We don't need them.
Get down to the iron. Yeah. But no, I mean, so that's the thing, right? We got arsenic, mercury, lead, and chromium.
You did it that time.
But especially, like, say, let's just take the two of mercury and lead.
Yeah.
Those were things that in antiquity, I mean, we're going back to like the Romans and even the Greeks. These were things that were available in the natural world. Yeah. We could smelt and release lead and mercury, and they were really useful. Lead was a really soft metal. You could form pipes out of it. You could form a vase or a pot or whatever.
I think they made bullets out of lead, right?
We still make bullets out of lead.
I don't know much about bullets, apparently.
But I mean, that's actually a problem. We'll get to that in a minute. But
if you get shot, do you get lead poisoning?
Yeah, let's come back to that because that's a really important point. But so in antiquity, especially the lead and the mercury, they were things that we could smelt, and they were super useful. Like mercury was this like liquid metal that if you mixed with ore that had gold and silver in it, and then evaporated off the mercury, you had gold and silver because of the process of amalgamation.
Sure.
Yeah, and then lead, super useful, making all these things out of. Yeah. Unfortunately, though, those two elements happen to be very toxic, and so we don't really want to use them anymore. Okay. But in antiquity, we used them.
We didn't know any better.
And, one of my favorite kind of anecdotes in kind of early human history is that, like, take the Romans, for example, they were booze hounds. They liked sure. occasional. They liked the glass of wine.
Yeah.
And what happens with wine if it goes bad? Well, it can turn to vinegar, right? Like you can.
I thought you were about to tell me it turned to lead. Okay.
That's a different thing. That's the alchemist.
Yeah.
But wine, it can sour. Sure. Go bad, forms vinegar, acetic acid. Well, they weren't that great of chemists, but at least they knew this much. If you take the soured wine, which had acetic acid in it.
I know about this.
Yeah.
Lead is sweet.
And you boil it in a lead pot, you form what's called sugars of lead, otherwise known as lead acetate, which is sweet. And so, you have the syrup and you can add it to wine or whatever.
You're adding lead syrup basically to wine. I mean, essentially.
And we're no longer talking like micrograms per kilogram. We're talking grams per kilogram.
Man, you thought wine was bad for you.
Yeah. And, there's been a lot of controversy in anthropology about the impact of lead on like the decline or the collapse of the Roman Empire. But I mean, those levels of lead, I mean, the things we know about rage, anger, and violence, and certainly a lack of good decision-making, there is some plausibility to, some of the toxicological effects having anthropological effects on, these societies. Okay, but we don't do that anymore, right?
Let's jump ahead.
Let's talk about the things our parents were exposed to when it came to lead. I mean, we weren't really cooking in lead pots anymore, but there were certainly lead pipes still. There's still lead pipes today.
My dad.
Cooking in lead pots?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's why I'm a journalist.
Oh no, well, maybe not. So lead pipes, lead paint, because lead oxide's brilliantly white. Why not add it to paint? Why not slather that on everybody's walls? And a really useful, at the time they thought, additive to gasoline, tetraethyl lead. Tetraethyl lead, being organic lead, even more toxic, but it prevents knocking and raises the octane of the fuel, and it's a great gasoline additive.
So, hang on, is like lead in gasoline like actually better for your car? Like it makes
objectively maybe it keeps
but it's so much worse for humanity.
Yeah, there's other additives that are not toxic. It's not like a zero.
I guess I never thought about like why are we putting lead into the gas?
I mean it had beneficial effects, but like those beneficial effects do not outweigh the like horrible human cost of the scourge of lead contamination in the 20th century from tetraethyl lead additives in gasoline. But anyway, I digress. We started to realize in the 20th century that lead was really bad for you.
Sure, okay.
And particularly neurotoxic. And that's when we started to come up with things like the Clean Air Act and really trying to stop the use of lead paints and lead additives. And you can see in ice cores and sediment samples and other things that, we had this kind of gradual rise through the 20th century as we started to add lead to so many different things. And we were literally, as a globe, being poisoned by lead. And then we banned lead, primarily lead in gasoline.
1963.
Well,
Clean Air Act.
the 1970s really was the kind of peak. And then it really, Clean Air Act started to clean things up. And that is, one of those great triumphant human achievements. We were able to get lead out of the environment in large part, at least in the ubiquity that it was when we had leaded gasoline. And wow, we got healthier. And, you looked at the lead concentration in children's blood and things started to get cleaner. And we know those kind of differences in concentration. We have controlled studies that say, that those, or at least, population studies that say that, those levels of lead, those differences in levels of lead have marked improvements on, kids' IQ, their cognitive abilities, decrease, risk of violence and stuff. And I'm not saying, there were a lot of serial killers in the 1970s because of lead, but
I mean, seems like there were more.
You never know. But this was one of the, I think, crowning achievements of environmental science.
Yeah.
But the, party for lead isn't over yet, and it is.
That's what I was going to ask. What does the future of lead look like, right? Where are we now?
Yeah, I mean, it is something that worries me because we've gotten lead out of gasoline in cars. It's still in aviation gas. So
wait, really? Like plane fuel has lead in it?
Yeah, for
it's like so many flights a day. So that's just still going in the air.
Well,
so we're still breathing
for piston-powered aircraft, so not jet engines, but for piston-powered aircraft. Most people that have general aviation, their own private aircraft, typically those piston-powered aircrafts. The low lead
does
or
it
the
have to be in there?
gas. Right now, the FAA likes to stick with lead gas because we know it.
Okay.
Well, because we know it, and we're worried that transitioning over, even though I think regular unleaded would be fine.
Yeah, they don't know.
We don't want to risk it, or the powers that be. Anyway, not important.
Sure. Taylor's about to take a very political stance, everybody.
I am not the regulator, and I do not speak for the regulator.
Okay.
Or
go watch The Rehearsal Season 2.
But anyway, but there are, so we mainly got it out of cars. That was a big thing. We mainly got it out of paint, although there's still plenty of buildings that have lead paint.
Okay.
We've been working to get it out of pipes, but that's slow. There's lots of pipes out there that have lead, and Flint was a good example. You change the water.
Sweeter.
Yeah. But you change the water chemistry and things can go wrong. So those are things that are legacy issues that we're trying to work through. There are really positive trends. An example would be lead acid batteries. Throughout the 20th century, basically the best batteries for a lot of applications were lead acid batteries. And because of the boom in modern lithium ion batteries, lead acid batteries are kind of going by the wayside. Unfortunately, lead acid batteries were one of the, most recycled things in the 20th century, because the lead is there, you get the lead back, but the lead smelting when you recycle lead is a dirty business. Okay. And there's examples of whole neighborhoods with depressed IQ scores because of lead recycling plants in that neighborhood. And that kind of gets me to where I want to end this, which is the things that really worry me about lead today really happen in the communities that we're not a part of.
Yeah.
So think like the developing world, think of, the global south, where our pollution is exported to a lot of times, that we don't have the kind of surveillance technologies that we have in, say, North America and in the United States, where, we test for lead and we test people for lead if they present with certain illnesses. There are places in the world that still experience the worst kind of lead exposures. And we're talking acute toxicity, people getting very sick. Certainly the things we've talked about, like decrease in intelligence scores and increased rates of violence and aggression and anger. Those are the things that are so tragic to me, because we live in a world now where we've created the problem, right? We've been creating the problem for a long time. Lead was this amazing material. And we developed the science, the toxicology, the environmental toxicology, to understand how bad it was for us. And for the most part, you and me, we're much safer against the perils of lead. But there are people being born today that are going to suffer from these same things, and that is tragic to me. Yeah. And I think we have to do a better job of not only cleaning up lead in our part of the world, but in all of the world. Yeah. And we know, lead doesn't respect borders. We talk to ice core scientists, and we see the lead in the ice in Greenland and Antarctica from sources of lead. Yeah, it's not like just
because it's happening somewhere else, it's not affecting
thousands
us.
Of miles away. But those people where we export this environmental pollution to, deserve to have the same kind of levels of safety and health that we expect. And I hope we get better at that. I really do.
Yeah. I want to wrap this up, Taylor, by asking about, are there ways to get lead out of the body?
Yeah, so we talk about chelation therapy.
There are ways to
so the canonical chelation agent would be EDTA. So basically what we want to find is something that will basically,
bind to it?
Yeah, take that heavy metal, and lock onto it and then excrete it from the body. And we can do that. And generally we do that in cases of, really severe poisonings. People present, with heavy metal poisoning. Important thing is, yes, if you get exposed to a lot of lead, you can get it out of you typically, but the kind of normal body burden from exposure to leaded gas or leaded paint, that's something most people don't even know they have, and the effects are kind of subclinical, I would say. You're not usually going to the ER with the kind of toxicological effects. So
heavy metal is not something to mess with, Taylor.
No, and not this kind. Not heavy metal rock. Heavy metal in rocks. Extracted from rock.
Good joke to end the episode.
Okay, well, sorry guys.
My
apologies.
One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.